is also here, and some who actually, I believe, joined online. These narratives are a form of conversations which we had after interviewing the participants that we met when we were still conducting the research. And the idea, as I have said, is to shape expectations and advising researchers on how best to prepare for studies reporting on migrant populations, in this case, actually traumatized migrant populations. Just to give an overview of the team that we have, our team is actually part of an international study consortium, which is actually focusing on access to mental health care for migrants. The study is being conducted here in Germany, also in Romania, China, Netherlands, and South Africa. But for this presentation, the focus is actually on the South African team. In order to convey actually our reactions to the work while conducting the interviews, as I have said, this is a reflexive analysis of the conversations that we had after interviewing the traumatized immigrants. It is important also to give you guys a sense of who we are and also the team that is actually working on this project. As you can see, we have Professor Leslie Swartz. He is the only professional clinical psychologist in the team. And we also have Professor Christine Antonissen, who is a linguist. We have Dr. Astandile. She's also a linguist. And there is also me, who has a public health background. We also had 2 research interns. Already, as you can see from the team composition, we have 1 professional psychologist, and we were working again with traumatized immigrants. That already tells you the kind of the team and the challenges possibly we expected. And an overview of the participants that we interviewed, around 71. These involved immigrants from DRC, Congo, some from Cameroon, Zimbabwe, and Rwanda. We also have some from Burundi and Gabon. And we also had healthcare professionals and supporters who live with these immigrants that we are working on. So in this case, the participants also spoke a range of languages we were primarily not familiar with. We are interviewing people from Burundi, some speak Swahili, and some speak Kirundi, and we are here from South Africa. I speak Shona. Some of the colleagues are English, and some are actually Afrikaans, and some are Xhosa. None of us kind of understood the languages that of the people we were interviewing. So we used this an NGO based here in Cape Town, which we used to kind of gather the participants for our study. And again, we had to rely on interpreters. And to our surprise, we literally do not have, I can say, trained or professional interpreters. We did not have some whom we could work with. So the interpreters that we worked with had no professional training in interpreting work, but were trusted by the refugee organization because they have been working with them. So this presentation, as I have said, I'm reporting on the findings of a reflective analysis of our narratives as the research team, and these narratives again are a form of conversations which we held amongst ourselves. So what really happened, which led us actually to come to this point and for us to kind of try and present this to you? As we were preparing for the study, we are a team from 5 different countries with experts involved, and part of it, everything that we actually developed, it goes through the rest of the group so that we prepare ourselves. So the interview guide that we used, it was created with expert assistance, extensive pilot testing, and preparatory discussions. And it aimed to explore the language challenges in healthcare settings with initial neutral approach to migration histories. But despite the preparation that we had, we found some questions unexpectedly triggered strong emotional reactions. In fact, the first question was, tell us about your migration journey. We just expected probably to tell us, I'm from Burundi and I've been here for this number of years and that. But the first question itself triggered a can of worms where they started narrating how some escaped from war, and some of them could show us even bullet wounds which they are still fighting. Some of us could tell us of how they, after 20 years or so after the war, they still have to drink alcohol and other substances so that they may sleep. They are still living with that trauma even till today. So on our side, the question was just general, but it opened up a can of worms, which again kind of diverted even the interview itself that we had. And stories from participants about traumatic migration journeys shifted the tone immediately. Reflections post-day. Actually, there was initial shock amongst ourselves, silence among team members, needing time to process the narratives shared. As I have said, we had a questionnaire or an interview guide prepared by experts. It went through every aspect and beating that we may need. But the first question, as general as it was, we ended up even taking close to 30 minutes, a person narrating how she ran away from Congo, went through Tanzania, went through Mozambique, how some were raped along the way, how some actually were hijacked, even lost their families coming down to South Africa. So this actually took possibly a quarter of the interviews, and these are stories we were personally not expecting, and that literally took a toll on us as researchers. And then again, on the first day when we were going back, I remember me and my colleague Asi, it took us about 15, 20 minutes sitting in the Uber coming back to Stellenbosch. We were not talking to each other. Then we just asked each other, how was it? And for a moment, I took a side again as we were traveling. So you could realize and you could sense even both of us and even the research intern, we were trying by all means to process all that we have had. At the same time, we still had to move along with the interview guide. So in this case, there was kind of a lot of emotional adjustments, learning to expect vulnerable trauma-led narratives shaping the team's preparedness. And you can actually see from the first day with the stories that we had, already the second day, third day, we were kind of expecting to be hearing all these stories. And that kind of shifted even our preparedness for what? For the interviews or even when meeting the participants. But as you know, we already had an objective. The objective was we have an interview guide, and this has to be done. Again, first day, we were shocked. Second day, again, you're still hearing all these stories. Third day, again, we knew, okay, this is what we are expecting. Fourth day, we are getting used to the what? To the stories again. Then, as you can see, gradual desensitization and moving forward from initial shock to a degree of emotional numbing due to repeated exposure to participants' hardships. So imagine you're listening to more than 40 participants, and each and every one of them have a different story and a traumatizing and traumatic story of how they happened to be in South Africa. So on our side, yes, the numbing was there. You are now used to, okay, we're expecting a story, or it's another one, it's another one. And imagine all of them had different stories and different experiences, and some could cry even when we were interviewing them. So the team, as a team, we struggled with being empathetic listeners while also focusing on research objectives. There was need, therefore, to balance the need to let participants share their stories freely with the need to adhere to the interview guides. You realize our interview with each participant, we could go to 2 hours, 2.5, and also because we really felt we need to give them the flow to explore all that they need to explore. But at the end of the day, how we were surprised, shocked, and how we were affected on the first day, if you were to look at us at the 7th day, the shock was kind of different. We were kind of expecting it, and we are now used to it. And to the extent that my colleague had to go with a tissue one day, expecting the participant to kind of cry. When you'll be crying, you could give her the tissue. But at the end of the day now, the tissue, it was interpreted in another way. Offering tissues was generally appreciated by one participant. It triggered negative memories of past failed therapy. To the guy, he used to attend these therapies, and the therapists could, before he start talking, then there's a tissue. So when he entered into the room, to him, he just assumed this is just one of those therapies. And he had to ask the interviewer to remove the tissue from the what? From the table, because it was now kind of triggering all the past experience that he has had with therapists and who could not even assist him. So as interviews progressed, we felt the need to distance ourselves emotionally, affecting the support we could offer participants as well. But then again, remember, I have public health background. She's a linguist, and we have research interns as well, and we only have one professional clinical psychologist. So in this case, in as much as we felt emotionally that these people really need help, but there is no help that we could give even to them. So again, even talking to them, seeing that they need help, we could actually see these migrant participants often they are in need of help. And even when we were talking to them, they were looking forward for us to give us information, to give them information about job opportunities, or even where to get help, and even help with documentation and medical bills after all. And in this case, again, we interviewed nearly close to all of them, actually. They do not speak English. So they rely again even on the supporters or even on the interpreters. And then again, the interpreters are from their own countries. The English is not that much 100%, but to them it is enough to kind of convey the messages which they wish to. But again, remember, you are in South Africa, you do not speak English, you do not speak any local language. You can understand even what they are going through or even trying to live in South Africa. So seeing us interviewing them, they were kind of expecting probably we have job offers, we have something that we can give. But at the end of the day, this was a research, and as also in our consent forms, we had actually narrated what we wanted to do. So we experienced repeated requests for help even after the study concluded. And the researchers, we felt helpless at times, as I've mentioned, particularly when continuing to ask probing questions despite participants' emotional responses. And this had actually an emotional impact of us, as I mentioned, a sense of helplessness, distress, and we were unable to actually provide direct help after all. And the challenge was on balancing empathy with the professional limitations, which led actually to emotional toll on the team, as we were only able to listen to the participants, but we could not act in any way to help them. So in doing so, and when we were interviewing the participants, there's something that we kind of noticed, and which we saw actually from the participants. Even after we were done interviewing them, they were actually thanking us. We realized, in as much as they have been in South Africa and they have been meeting different organizations, but none of them had kind of given them the floor that we gave for them to fully speak about their migration journey and all that they went through. Someone just listening, and they are pouring themselves out, in as much as they were crying, but they found it as therapeutic. And some will tell you, this is my first time someone sitting down and listening to me telling all that I went through when I was coming here. So that told us the help they are getting is just being an immigrant here, but very few kind of had the opportunity to just pour themselves, what really pushed them to be down here in South Africa. Can you tell me really what really happened when you were moving down here? And of which those were the stories which were burning and which they still have and living with. I remember a guy who have been here for 20 years. He ran from Rwanda in 1994 and has been living here in South Africa since then. And he was actually saying, this is my first time someone is just listening to me, narrating all the bodies that he saw, which were of people dead, lying, and all those things, and how that is still haunting him till today. So despite not being therapists, we found ourselves emotionally invested in participants' well-being, and the team found it rewarding to provide a listening ear, but it came with emotional challenges that lingered well even after the interviews on us. And even after months of data collection, researchers, we still feel connected to the participants' lives, and even still wondering their well-being and daily struggles. So again, when we were interviewing them, as I mentioned, we were working with interpreters, but these are not professional interpreters. They happen to be interpreters because they know English and they also can speak Kirundi, and so they are able to kind of communicate on behalf of their fellow immigrants. So using an informal and trained interpreters brought unique challenges, especially with conveying participants' intense emotions and traumatic stories accurately. So what we actually noticed, even when we then hired a company which kind of transcribed the data for us from Kirundi, you realize when the interpreter was narrating the story from us, you are sitting there and you tell the interpreter what to ask the participant. Then the participant is explaining everything to the interpreter in detail, and actually you can see crying and you can see the conversation going on between the two of them. Then when it comes to the interpreter telling me the story, the interpreter kind of summarized everything. Then that emotions and emotional aspect that I was seeing between the two of them, it kind of went missing. Okay, then from then you are wondering, okay, I saw a person crying and everything, but the way the interpreter is kind of summarizing it, something is so, which I kind of understood. He is also trying not to cut the participant from pouring himself or herself. Then again, it's like, this is a little bit long, so let me just try to summarize so that he can understand what the participant is saying. But we then again, as we are going through and we transcribe the transcript, you realize there is a lot of detail that you can miss if really you are to only rely on what the interpreter said. And you realize even the length of the interpretation, the direct translation, which we had with the company that we used to translate, it is actually longer, and there are some emotional gestures which actually for our research are very important if we are to report on that. But you can see again, the way the interpreter summarized it kind of missed those gestures along the way, which also to researchers, actually some who are watching, we also can learn something even from our own experiences. So as I've said, the interpreter's visible emotions such as tears added an additional emotional weight, affecting the researchers and intensifying their sense of responsibility. Again, in our team, as I've mentioned, I have a public health background. I'm originally from Zimbabwe, and we actually had two other colleagues we were working with. They are originally from South Africa, other one from Gauteng, and she's also from Eastern Cape. But you can actually tell how we experienced this and actually viewed this. In as much as I could hear and they can their stories are the horrific stories. Yes, I was affected, but the impact it had on my colleagues who are already South Africans was a little bit different, because some of the story to me, I have lived them, I have seen some of them, and some possibly have shared, but they had never kind of shared in detail like how they were doing. However, the point here is the group dynamics and how even the researchers' backgrounds, they kind of also shape how we react to such stories, even traumatic stories of immigrants. How I was affected, the level of it was a little bit different from how she was affected. My colleague, I think she went to the USA 2 weeks ago. She had an issue at the airport. So first thing she said when she got back here, I now understand what you go through sometimes when you tell me that. So you can realize this was her first time experiencing that. But to me, I'm now numb. She's always hearing me. My visa is not yet out. I'm still waiting. And you can understand the emotional toll. So how, if someone is to narrate that to me, how it affects me is a little bit different from how she's affected, which is more or less what happened when we were conducting these studies also. So the group composition also matters, especially when you are conducting studies like this. So for team members, as I've said, who were new to such intense migrant experiences, hearing these stories led to a visibly stronger emotional impact. So as I conclude, what could be the basic recommendations and our conclusions from this paper? Researchers embarking on trauma research should anticipate that the initial phase, particularly the first set of interviews, will set the most demanding, will be the most demanding and emotionally taxing. And the first stage, depending on experience, might alter how you approach and proceed with the interviews. If I have said the first day, how we were and what we expected to hear is not what we expected to hear, which kind of forced us to shift how we were to conduct even the interviews. Even when we got back, we really had to talk to our PI with Professor Leslie. We had to again do the debriefings. He had to talk to us again. You know, we are researchers interviewing traumatized people, but we still need someone to talk to us again for this to kind of, and counseling and everything. So debriefings also are very important, especially when you are working on traumatic studies, in this case, especially with immigrants, and you know, these are new stories that I'm going to be hearing. You still need someone, not only one, even two, whom even after you are done, you can talk to and they can hear what has been happening and even talk to you back. And the composition of the research team, as I've said, plays a significant role in managing the emotional burden evoked by the interview process, as I've been explaining. So the challenge of balancing empathy with professional limitations, which led to an emotional toll on the teams, as we're only able to listen and not act on anything. So there was actually a difficulty in balancing between emotional closeness and distance. So researchers need to understand and to emotionally understand and respond appropriately and behave ethically in a supportive way, but also must not be emotionally overwhelmed by the material which they will be discussing with the participants. With this, ladies and gentlemen, I say thank you. Siyabonga ndatenda danki.
Thank you, Rowan.
Thank you so much
for a really fascinating talk.
Thank you so much.
I think opens up quite a number of different avenues of discussion.
Thank you so much.
So yeah, we have quite a bit of time for questions and comments.
Okay, thank you so much.
So Mark, at the moment I can't see the online crowd, but is there anyone in the audience here who has a question or a comment for Rowan at this stage? While Mark is helping me to see the, we're almost there. Anyone here? A question, a comment? I can feel it. Any, sorry, I'm sort of going into the, so I can't read there. I was banned. Okay, I don't see any questions yet, am I right? Anyone on the online? Questions, comments? Don't be shy. If you want to ask a question, just unmute and jump right in. Rowan, I see at the moment no one yet, if I'm correct. As I said, I'm not good with these tech things, but I was wondering, so if I can just say, I didn't want to jump in, but I was listening to you and there's one thing that you said here, despite not being therapists, and then you say what kind of challenges are that interviewers deal with in real life research. And I was thinking about how we train qualitative research, how we teach people to do qualitative research. And I was wondering, given what you said and the kind of challenges that there are, and the level of sort of emotional work that needs to be done, how do you think this would impact on how we actually train people to do qualitative research? Because it's clear that the interview goes way beyond the kind of just a technique or a tool, and it involves oneself in a way. So is there anything specifically around qualitative research training that you think should be done differently, or given what you've discussed or experienced?
On my side, I can actually speak on basis of especially trauma research, because when we are actually training people about qualitative research,
Yes,
there are no these specifications, and if you can see from this, we had a guide that went through experts, and we thought this is going to cover everything. And in terms of theory and stuff, that was right, but we were not anticipating it to unlock this other side. of the interviews. So if we are to say qualitative studies, I think it's also good to say if we are actually going through this is a trauma study, can we have something specifically for qualitative study that is focusing on that, or even if we can have debriefings even with our own researchers, this is what you might actually hear from the participants, and this might affect you this way. This might actually be important. Even if we had that and we knew possibly this is going to happen, we would have been affected in such a way.
It's interesting because to me it seems almost like what you describe and the kinds of interviews you're doing. Of course, it's in a sense an extreme thing because you're working with people who experience significant trauma, but it reveals something more general about any kind of qualitative interview.
That's true. That's true. That's true.
So from what you're describing, I could probably rethink completely how we
think can. About it. That's true. That's true. So to me, it's also an issue of preparedness. Just if we can prepare even ourselves for the extremes, probably which is not covered in this, and how best we can respond to that. At the end of the day, from our own experiences, we were hearing all this, but we still had to adhere to what we have on the interview guide. We still needed answers to each and every question.
Yes.
So actually that skill again is very important. And as much as you are hearing this, which might divert you from the guide that you have, remember you still have to come back to the guide. We need answers for this.
That's quite a challenge. I see there's a written question here. Thank you for the presentation. It's from Neil. It was informative and triggering. 2 questions. Did the interview guide change in any way during your processes? And how did the team engage empathy beyond the academy?
Thank you. We did not change the interview guide, but the information we got actually strengthened our research. We are now even reporting on other things which we did not expect to be getting. Actually, we now have lots of data.
Yes.
So it's strengthened us. It gave us more information. In as much as we are reporting on what we were looking for, we now have actually extra information. So we did not change anything, but we actually got something from it, which is beyond actually what we had written. And the second question was?
How did the team engage empathy beyond the academy?
So what we did even after the interviews, even till today, some of them, they are still texting us, especially the leaders and all those things. I remember this other time, the group, I think from Burundi, where they were staying, their sheikhs caught fire. We really had to kind of chip in and they had to text us. So in doing so, we kind of became part of them, even understanding them, what's happening with them, and even them telling us what's happening with them. In this case, when we were interviewing them, I could not offer anything because I was just there as a researcher. But beyond that, possibly still listening to them, hearing what's going on with them is the best that we could, and we can still offer even till now. And on top of that, we are having interpreters training, which we are hoping even those who are working as interpreters, if one day along the way they can come, they can be trained also, because we're going to be rolling out even trainings for interpretations.
Okay. Any further questions? We didn't see a hand. Maybe.
Yes. Hi.
Thank you.
Great presentation.
Thank you.
You said that when you're asking them to tell you about their migration journey, it kind of opened some sort of can of worms because they opened up more now. They told you things that you never expected, things that you didn't anticipate that they'll be talking about. Would you say that maybe they saw you and they heard your accent and then they saw their faces reflected in you, or maybe they just opened up because they were given the chance to at least talk about their experiences? Maybe for some of them for the first time, or maybe they felt understood, or maybe they felt like their experiences matter for the first time, maybe.
I can say, number one, it was possibly the opportunity to speak without anyone interrupting them. I can't say it was an issue of accent because the team, I was the only Zimbabwean, the rest are all from here. So the accent may not have been an issue because even I was in my own room. She was in another room interviewing another participant. She was in another room, but our experiences, in as much as we were in different rooms, were just the same. So I cannot say it was about accent, but it was really the opportunity which they got. Oh, for the first time, I can openly and freely talk what I really felt and how I was raped along the way, how I'm still drinking alcohol, to kind of how I'm still hearing voices. So it's a matter of opportunity which they had. Thank you.
If I just can add to what Rowan has been saying, maybe going back to your question, Desmond, about, was it you who asked about did we change the interview guide?
I just wanted to.
Yeah.
Oh, online, oh, okay. We did consider that within the border, even colleagues from Germany, from Netherlands, it was discussed. Why did we overlook this first question of tell us about your migration journey, right? And we kind of had to assess, is that a good question to ask or should we take it out? And we actually decided that that was a good question to ask because it gave us information that we did not even anticipate, right? We didn't ask certain questions that they actually, answered in their question of their migration journey. So it was actually a resource for us, asking them about that, their migration journeys. We were, as Rowan said, we were just looking at how did you arrive in South Africa? How was your journey? And this was an interview guide that went through, Leslie's a clinical psychologist, right? So you saw that question, but no one actually anticipated that it would trigger emotion, certain memories in the participants. And I don't know how. And I think to answer you, Desmond, about, I think it was about the emotions, right? We don't, and how to approach qualitative research. I don't think we could have prepared for the emotions themselves that we got on the interviews. We prepared in our way of understanding qualitative research, but I think each interview was very unique. There were participants who could narrate the stories without crying, right? And they could. Alice did not even specify, so it wasn't really. I thought it was very different with each participant, and some of them who really felt the need to speak out, felt that in that moment, and they could really speak out. But certain participants just decided they wouldn't really speak out on the journeys, and so it was very different. But I think it's very important what you said about training qualitative researchers for such. For trauma research. Yeah, it was very eye-opening, but also I think there's a lot that we took out of the experience that we think we could probably do better if we had the opportunity to do it again. We could probably do better. Yeah.
Thank you for that. That's interesting. I just want to read this one comment here. This sort of critical comment, I guess, but you could perhaps just respond, and perhaps it links to some of what you've just said. So Teresa van Rooyen says, it appears as if not much focus was initially put on ethics. These were vulnerable groups, and the researchers themselves should have been protected by the ethics. Just an observation. I don't know if you want to just respond to that in some way.
Thank you. I can say from what I said.
Yeah.
The question itself, it was a general question, and from what we were looking for, the language challenges and the experiences when accessing healthcare. The question actually was not specifically, and we were not kind of looking into them narrating their journey and everything. This is something that we kind of, in fact, all of us here wouldn't have anticipated, even if we were to train anyone to be prepared for that. You can't prepare yourself to say, this one is going to tell me this story and I have to do this. And we have 30 different stories. The ethics, yes, we went through that. Everything was accordingly. Even the guide itself, it went through everything that is needed for us to receive even the ethical clearance. Yes. But that one question kind of triggered something that we were all not expecting or even anticipating.
If we have a follow-up question.
Okay, one last thing. It's actually based on what you said. I think by change in the interview schedule is when someone is showing emotions in front of you, especially in when you're conducting a study and when you interviewing participants. I think the person was trying to ask whether did you ask additional questions that were not in the schedule. And when you were doing that, maybe in some ways you'd be validating their feelings, or maybe you'd be trying to make sure that they take it all out because this is the one and only chance they're given to express how they feel or how they felt rather about the process of migrating to another environment. So I think let me ask the question. Did you maybe ask additional questions that were not in the schedule? And like in so doing, you also had validated it.
Should I answer? Okay. So you can realize from onset, they were eager. They really wanted to pour out. So remember again, he's speaking Kirundi, and I'm also waiting for the interpreter to tell me in English. But the interpreter is sitting there. You can see the interpreter also probing to get, oh, so what happened? What really happened and stuff. And again, the participant really wants to pour herself out. And you realize you might try to stop her. The next thing actually is going back to continue from where she left so that she can narrate the story until she got here. So again, we had to give that space, pour yourself out. Again, we still have to come back to the interview guide that we have. If the participant or we were to probe more because they really want to pour out, can we try to ask more? Oh, okay, so what really happened? Oh, you went through Malawi and stayed there. You also learned Chichewa. Oh, what pushed you into learning Chichewa? Again, we really had to adapt to that because they also wanted to tell us their stories in detail, in as much as it was a little bit diverting to that. So again, you are forced, okay, the person is already pouring. You cannot just cut the person from nowhere. At least let's get along and gradually we'll go to our questions again after I have kind of listened to you. Yeah.
I think I agree with what you're saying because it was an opportunity for most of them to pour out because no one has ever asked them, how was your journey? How did you get to South Africa? And also in an interested way, like you are genuinely interested in their migration journeys. But I think I struggle with this personally because I don't have a psychology background, I'm a linguist. I struggled to maybe find the moments when I had to stop probing and look at watch the participants' body language in the sense of, I don't want to say more about this. I don't want to talk more about this. And also the probing part. So it was kind of difficult in some moments where you felt like, should I probe? Should I ask more questions? Or should I maybe stop and maybe give them a moment to just process what they're going through and then move on to the next question. So for me personally, it was a struggle to know when to probe and when not to probe, to just listen as a researcher and probe as a researcher, or when to be just human and allow them to just be in the moment.
Quick question to you now. How did you overcome that? Maybe I'm thinking that it must have been hard for the first 2, 3, 5 participants, but as like you were getting maybe to the end, how did you see any change, or did you start grasping now how to conduct these things and how to observe the expressions and how the phrases that they use when they're answering your questions that suggest that I no longer want to talk about this, or maybe I want you to ask me more about it. I want you to at least try to probe a bit so that I can tell you even more. But I don't want to just tell you because I don't want to go over the question. I want you to validate my feelings. How did you?
So I would say I got used to it as time went on. I made a lot of mistakes personally. Listening to my audio, I would be very honest in saying that there were moments where I felt like I could have probed more. And then there were moments where I felt like I could of start in this moment and just allow the participant to, just speak. But also our interviews were interpreter-mediated interviews. So the presence of a third party also affected the flow of the conversation, the flow of the interview. So sometimes you would see the emotion, but as Rowan said, the interpreter just to summarize. So you can't really, why is she crying? Why is this point making her emotional? So sometimes you would realize, oh, I've got it. I only have 13 minutes, or I only have, you look at the time, you look at the technical elements of, conducting an interview, you realize you don't really have time to ask more than what the interpreter has given you. So I think with the experience, I could get better. But in that moment, I think I made quite a lot.
Okay. We have 2 more questions online. I'm just going to read, and then I'll go read both, and then you can respond. So the first one, Arnold Tawanda Milos asks, awesome presentation. My question is, moving forward, since the intended research was not acted upon, is there any follow-up to come, or the take-home will be used in future?
Thank you.
Thank you. And then thank you so much for this insightful, thought-provoking presentation. I was thinking about the sense of helplessness that researchers sometimes experience, especially when they are unable to address the immediate concrete needs of the people they work with, such as finding employment, securing housing, or accessing essential services. How do you, personally and as a group, navigate this tension between your role as a researcher and the limitations of what you can offer in terms of direct support?
Okay. Thank you so much. I can just to come back to you from what she has said. Actually, you realize how we conducted the interviews first day was totally different from second day. It's totally different from third day. You kind of become better as you kind of go on with them. And you realize even first day, it might have been 2 hours. But as we moved, the interview started to be shorter. That one now is because of the experience, and we now know and kind of, okay, now it's getting there. Can I try now to move it this way so that I kind of come back to my guide? And to answer to Milos, like I said, the question actually added more information to what we had. The interview guide, we still had to go through each and every question. So we acted upon the research, but this was now information which was kind of added to our own research. So now from that experience that we had, hence we had to write this paper, even do this presentation to kind of prepare our fellows, even other researchers, anticipate this, expect this. These are some of the things you might need to kind of see. And in terms of helplessness, at the end of the day, finding a job, it's something which I could not do. My consent form, my ethics, and other things that we had, we specified what we really wanted to do. And as a person, again, for me to promise any job, I could not. But the recommendations, or even from the NGOs and others that we were seeing, probably that's what we could do. But for us to actually say, I can get you a job, it was difficult. You quickly had to actually tell them and try to find a way, in a polite way, that this is what you are trying to, I cannot offer. But probably the NGOs that we are working with might have information in terms of that. I think that was the last question I was trying to.
One final question, but you just said something about NGOs. So the question here again, Teresa van Rooyen, did you perhaps speak to NGOs working with migrants in preparing yourself?
We actually, from the groups that we are working with or that we interviewed immigrants. We also interviewed what we call immigrant supporters, guys who are living with these people in the communities. We also interviewed the healthcare professionals, and we also interviewed stakeholders. In terms of stakeholders, this also included NGOs. We also went to Scalabrini and some of the centers around Cape Town. We interviewed them as well. So in terms of the data that we have, yes, we interviewed and covered all that. But in this case, we're just sharing our own experiences that we had.
Right. Thank you. I think, colleagues, it's 4 minutes to 2. I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you for everyone joining. Don't run yet. Thank you, Rowan, for your fascinating talk. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, colleagues. I don't know how I want to end the thing that's online.
Thank you
Thanks
so
for
much.
joining.
Thank you.